Hello and welcome to a special edition of Spectator TV. And we just had the final ballot of the parliamentary rounds, and myself, Katie Balls, and James Forsyth are going to discuss what it means. Ultimately, if we look at the results of this, Penny Mordaunt has been knocked out. That means that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are into the final two. And do send any questions you have about what happens next. James, what's your initial thoughts on seeing that result?
So Rishi Sunak topped the ballot by, I think, a bit more than people thought. I think the speculation in Parliament earlier today was that the three candidates would be quite closely bunched up together. Penny,
so Rishi Sunak got 137, Liz Truss in second on 113, and Penny Mordaunt on 105. So very little between the third place and second place.
And I think that, in some ways, this was, as you said, this was after Kemi Badenoch went out. And given that at that point Liz Truss was within single digits of Penny Mordaunt, it always seemed likely that she would be able to get over the line. I think the Penny Mordaunt campaign feel that the Truss campaign kind of pushed some of the stuff that has done Penny Mordaunt a lot of damage in recent days. But now we go on to this Sunak-Truss membership round. Liz Truss will start that as the favourite. But there is a kind of clear intellectual divide between the two of them, which we've already seen in these debates, which is, Rishi Sunak argues two things, really, that one, the immediate priority has to be controlling inflation, and secondly, that you can't have something for nothing. Liz Truss's argument is that, the most pressing thing is to get growth going, and she's going to slash taxes to do that, and she's not going to bring back austerity, and she's going to spend more on defence.
And we're now looking ahead to the next stage of the contest. So in theory, you could be having a bit of a pause at the moment. Effectively, this contest will run for quite a long time, through July, through August. The victor will not be announced till early September. But James, it's ultimately in the interest of particularly Rishi Sunak to get going quite quickly, isn't it? Because right now he is behind Liz Truss on all membership polling. YouGov, Conhome, in all their polling, and obviously take polling as ever with a pinch of salt, having a runoff that he would lose to her. And the ballots go out in early August. So does that mean that actually the window to try and win hearts, change minds is smaller than it first seems?
Yeah, the theory is that Tory voters are kind of people who reply by return of post when they're sent their postal ballots. And so you've really got, that once you get towards the middle of August, the majority of members will have voted already. So that front loads this contest. There is a BBC debate on Monday night. There's a first hustings tomorrow. And so you might think that, the two campaigns will want to, go home, have a drink, celebrate this moment. No, instead, it is straight back at it, because by the end of August, I think, there'll be very few Tory members who haven't voted. It's at the start of this contest that the most minds will be open to being changed.
And a slight question, I think we have half answered this. One of the questions that has come in is when does voting start for party members, and does that timing matter? So just to clarify, as soon as they receive their ballots in early August, they can vote.
Yes. There has been a story today, which I haven't had a chance to check on, which is they would be able to vote by post and then change their vote later on online. But I can't, if that is true, that strikes me as a recipe for a certain amount of confusion. But I certainly think that both campaigns are operating on the assumption that it's the opening weeks of the campaign that matter the most.
And then we've been talking about the polling of the parties. There's a question that's just come in, which is how much have MPs voting been influenced by polls of membership and the public? What do you think the answer to that is? Rishi Sunak ultimately probably, I think there is mixed polling on what the general public think, and I think there was a general perhaps lack of excitement by any candidate, but a lot of the polling has put Rishi Sunak in the best place amongst the public. If you think about the snap verdict on the debate on Sunday, meanwhile, the membership polling has put Liz Truss in a much better place. Has that been influencing MPs when working out where they're going to switch, who they're going to back?
So I don't think it's had a decisive impact on MPs because, Kemi Badenoch, who got knocked out, it was the days that all run into each other. Was it yesterday she got knocked out? Yes. Yesterday.
It's only Wednesday.
No, God, is it? The polling suggested that she would win with the membership. So, but I think there are, the Penny Mordaunt camp this morning were quite aggressively making the argument to MPs that Liz Truss couldn't win a general election. So don't put her into the final two. And that, I think that has an effect on some MPs. I think there are other MPs who look at Liz Truss and see her ahead with the members and think, well, if that's, the members want, that's who you should pick. I think now the big question now, I think, is, this is now over to the members. MPs now only have one vote as a member of their local association. Some of them will have two votes because they'll be a member of their association, their constituency, and where they live in London. But it will become a quite, and I think the big question is, what is going to influence them, and I think that you will see a lot of attempts to kind of these hustings, and and I think it's quite interesting that the first one tomorrow is with Conservative councillors, because I think councillors and people like that will now almost have as much, if not more, influence on this contest as MPs, because people can turn. This might seem an odd thing to say. Some people who are Tory members are not they will look to other people in the association for what do you think electorally. I was interesting. I was talking to someone who's an association chairman in a prosperous seat in the south of England yesterday, and they were saying that they hadn't talked to their members yet, but they were struck talking to their officers. The local elections there had left, and where they got run a lot closer than they had previously, had left a big impression on them.
Now, let's do two questions at once. Is Rishi a safer pair of hands than Liz? And is there any realistic chance that any winner can unite the party? I'll take the first one, James, you take the second. So I think on that first question about who is the safer pair of hands, I think ultimately both are experienced cabinet ministers. Actually, Liz Truss is longer serving, if you think about how long she's been in cabinet, than Rishi Sunak, but Rishi Sunak has been in a more senior role in the sense of being chancellor. I think that Rishi Sunak's plan, as James was saying, of one of fiscal responsibility, I think you could say that Liz Truss's plan for the economy is more radical than Rishi Sunak's. And I imagine, I think there is a sense amongst MPs that they have probably a greater idea of how Rishi Sunak would govern, partly because he has been so key in so many decisions on things through the pandemic, through other aspects. Whereas with Liz Truss, she's definitely won lots of plaudits from the base for what she's done as foreign secretary, the trade deals. But it means we've got less of an idea on how she would tackle domestic issues. We know where she is ideologically, but how does that work when you're actually the one in charge? So I think there's probably a little bit more of a sense that what you're getting with Rishi Sunak, just in the sense, will Liz Truss be as radical as she says she is going to be? I think that's still an unknown.
And on uniting the party, I think you've got a reminder of how difficult it's going to be at PMQs today. As Boris Johnson left, Tory MPs stood up to applaud him, a kind of standing ovation that had been organised by Robert Goodwill, who's one of Rishi Sunak's backers, a unity gesture. Theresa May stayed sitting for quite a while and then got up and didn't clap. And I think
she was very much, I can do it in person, she was stood like this, I noticed.
And when you have changed leader 3 times in 6 years, it does inject a certain amount of poison into the bloodstream. And that will be quite, and that will be a challenge for any new leader. But I think the one thing that I would say, I was actually going to say 2 things. One is,
your heart up.
People you could, because this is going to the members, that no one has dropped out. There will, and if the sorry, I'm not going to say that, but let's talk about David Cameron and David Davis. When David Cameron and David Davis went to the country, I think it was safe to say that no one thought they were bosom buddies. But actually, by the end of this touring the country, doing all these hustings, they had actually they actually were kind of like an old theatrical couple. They could kind of finish each other's sound bites. They knew what they were. And they actually got on, I think, until they got on when David Cameron set up his shadow cabinet surprisingly well, much better than people would have expected. So there is a chance that happens. Although I think this contest is more fiercely contested than that one was.
And there could be more blue and blue this time. Yeah, it's been pretty vicious between the two already, right?
And I think the two do genuinely. Now, this could, you could argue, makes it less personal in some ways, but there is a genuinely really big ideological disagreement between them. In terms, Rishi Sunak is a Thatcherite, Liz Truss is a Reaganite. Rishi Sunak believes that, in sound money, that you've got to have tax cuts, have got to be paid for. Liz Truss thinks that, the deficit can be, she is much more relaxed about letting the deficit take the strain, and thinks that kind of trying to get growth going is the most important thing above all. I would argue that there are some differences between the UK and the US. The UK is not a global reserve currency, not the global reserve currency, but this is clearly going to be the ideological debate of this campaign.
Now, a couple of questions, and then we're going to have to wrap this up. So let's try and get through them at breakneck speed, a bit like the parliamentary rounds of this contest. I think I'll take this one. Do you think Theresa May could come back into government in an attempt to unite the party? Great question, James. Maybe you can just do a facial expression rather than answer.
I think of all the predictions, I think that is relatively unlikely.
I think very unlikely under Liz Truss, and also unlikely under Rishi Sunak. I actually think if we're thinking what the new cabinet's going to look like, I think there'll be a big drive to bring in some of the younger intakes, some fresher faces. Given all the turmoil of late, I think one of the ways, given both the candidates are quite experienced and are tied to Boris Johnson cabinet decisions, I think one of the ways you will try and move on and make the government seem different is by having quite a new cabinet.
I also think that in terms of party management, I think the one thing that both of them have said they will do, they've talked about appointing on merit, which is kind of code for a broader span of the party being in the cabinet than has been the case in recent years.
And on that, someone has asked, is there something potentially undemocratic about MPs taking Penny Mordaunt and Kemi Badenoch out at this round when polls have shown they're the most loved by the members? Now, it's probably worth pointing out that Penny Mordaunt was very loved last week, seemed to go down a bit this week because there is so much volatility. But I understand the point of this question. Do you think they've done members a disservice?
I think that Jeremy Corbyn showed that if you do not have the backing of your parliamentary colleagues, it is very difficult to lead your party. I also think MPs do see these candidates up close, and I think they are providing them with a choice of two, and I don't think that is an unreasonable choice to provide them with. And I think I think also you have to remember this, which is something that I think can be quite easily forgotten. If the Tories were in opposition, you could argue that there should be if the Tories were in opposition, I would say that this timetable has been absurdly short. And you should have waited. You should have had a kind of hustings at party conference and then MPs vote, as happened in 2005. But the Tories are in government, and you have to have a prime minister with authority again, because this country is by September will have 3 crises coming at it. There will be the kind of current economic crisis. There will be an energy crisis. Just look at the fact that when Nord Stream 1, the Russian gas pipeline to Germany, is turned back on again tomorrow, the expectation is that the Russians, they'll turn it on a little, but not very much, because they don't want the Germans to be able to build up a stockpile of gas for the winter. And so, we are clearly going to have an energy crisis in Europe because of the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the Russian attempt to use energy as a weapon. And you have a very, very volatile global security environment. You obviously have a war in Europe right now with Russia invading Ukraine. And you also have China declaring, for example, that the Taiwan Strait is not international waters, it's a domestic waterway. So, I think providing the members with 2 experienced cabinet ministers a choice is not fundamentally unreasonable. Okay,
now I really want to get through these because we don't take too much of everyone's time. So, final round of questions. Let's go first with this one, James. Perhaps you can shed some light. Is there any suggestion as to who each candidate would appoint as their chancellor?
I think that is not clear at the moment.
Some talk of Kwasi Kwarteng for Liz Truss.
I think that you would think for Liz Truss, the 2 obvious candidates would be Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, is backing her, and Simon Clarke, chief secretary of the Treasury, who's also backing her. Yeah. But I don't think it's totally obvious, if you see what I mean. In that, when David Cameron was running for leader, it was quite obvious that George Osborne was going to be his shadow chancellor. When Tony Blair was running for leader, it was infamously famous that Gordon Brown was going to be his shadow chancellor. I don't think it is obvious right now who each candidate would pick. Who
do you think the contenders are for Rishi Sunak?
I mean, that is a very interesting question, and I would not be comfortable hazarding a guess because I think he will want someone who shares his fiscal consumption. Now,
could that be a Steve Barclay type figure? I mean, Steve Barclay's gone from Boris Johnson to backing him, so that's a contender.
Yeah, maybe. But I think if you look at
Nadeem Zahouri, he hasn't backed anyone. He might be about to lose his job.
But I think if you see, I think in some ways, because Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng is very committed to what you could call Trussonomics, right? He is a big, he said on today's program, I'm going to paraphrase, you shouldn't be obsessed with balancing the books. That is very much the kind of Trussonomics view. And so I think it is easier there. I think the Rishi Sunak is, to my mind, less clear who would be his contenders for that job.
Maybe he could do both.
That was, do you remember the Gordon Brown joke about that? Gordon Brown in his last budget was the whole thing about Gladstone, and Gladstone had tried to be both Prime Minister and Chancellor. And it was intended as a joke, but the problem was that relations were rather fraught on the Labour front bench at the time, as he was about to take over from Tony Blair. And you could see them all look like they'd swallowed the lemon, because some of them, I think, actually thought he was serious, that he was intending to do both jobs.
Watch his face. Now, penultimate question. What are the chances of an early general election if the winning leader cannot solve the economic problems facing the country? Now, all the candidates have said they don't want an early election, the multiple hustings they've done. But do you think there's a chance they don't have a choice in the matter if they can't lead?
I think the early elections is this idea that will not die, despite how many times, Katie, you and I repeatedly try and slay it. Right. Just to back up the track. This new Prime Minister will inherit a majority of close to 80, right?
But not everyone will necessarily play ball.
No, not everyone will necessarily play ball. But I also think if you look at the economy, look at what Governor of the Bank of England said at the Mansion House last night, he was predicting that by 2024, the economy would be recovering strongly. I think that it would seem to me very politically perverse not to give as long as possible for inflation to wash through the system, to hopefully get a bit of growth back, be able to do some of the tax cuts, and then go to the country and say October 2024. I think it would be, I cannot see any argument for a new Tory Prime Minister going earlier than that. I think even there is a big leaders' bounce. I think one of the things that you saw, I think one of the things that you saw from Theresa May is, given the severity of the situation, I think it would be quite hard, even if you got a big bounce, to say, by the way, I know we're dealing with 3 crises simultaneously, but I thought I'd just chuck a general election at that. I just don't see how it works. And I think it's not something that Tory MP, ultimately for Theresa May, even the vicar's daughter could not resist the temptation of, what was it, a 28 point opinion poll lead. I mean, I don't think even the most optimistic backers of either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss would claim that if you elected their candidate, the Tories would be 28 points ahead by Christmas.
Now, the final question is actually a personal one to both of us. So thank you for asking about our welfare. Any summer holiday plans, guys, or is it too soon to think the summer will be a lull?
The front loading of the contest, I think, can justify my planned week off in the middle of August in France.
I thought it was more than 1 week.
No, the second week is in the Lake District, but I haven't quite let on. But that I think could be kind of, these hustings are all going to be streamed, so there'll be no need to kind of schlep around the country.
Yeah, I'm hoping to disappear for a few days, but we'll see. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll be back later on as this contest goes on with more updates. So thank you for joining for this special edition of Spectator TV.